We live in an era where we're constantly told to just think positive. You know the drill, right? But here's the wild thing. For millions of people, staring in the mirror and repeating generic affirmations doesn't actually build confidence. In fact, it actively destroys it. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the clinical neuroscience of micro-mental health. We're going to uncover exactly why toxic positivity completely fails us, and more importantly, how you can physically rewire your brain's structure for genuine, lasting resilience. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with the affirmation backfire effect, dive into the science of self-affirmation, tackle defeating imposter syndrome, explore the power of body neutrality, and finally, bring it all together by looking at rewiring your brain daily. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the affirmation backfire effect. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror repeating something like, "I am a completely confident person," while your brain just completely and totally rejects the idea? You might even feel a physical sense of discomfort in your gut. Well, you're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. So why exactly do these positive affirmations backfire? Well, it turns out your brain is this incredible evolutionary machine that's expertly designed to protect its sense of reality. When you try to force it to accept a statement that you don't actually believe, it triggers massive cognitive dissonance. Basically, your nervous system registers a biological mismatch, and your brain's mirror neurons turn inward, aggressively rejecting this counterfeit information. It's like your brain is saying, "Nope, nice try, we don't buy that." There is actually a fascinating landmark study on this by Dr. Joanne Wood. She proved that for people with low self-esteem, traditional empty affirmations caused measurable psychological harm. Get this, nearly 23% of the people in her study actually felt noticeably worse after forcing themselves to repeat overly positive statements. It completely backfired. Psychologists have a great name for this. They call it the widening gap phenomenon. The crucial takeaway here is that when high achievers, or really anyone struggling with self-esteem, repeat empty affirmations, their analytical minds instantly start searching for counter-evidence. And that just amplifies the inner critic. Saying "I'm a total success" when you're feeling like a failure literally just reminds your brain of the exact gap between where you are right now and where you want to be. Let's shift gears and move to section 2. The science of self-affirmation. Let's look at how true, evidence-based self-affirmation bypasses all of that neurological skepticism entirely. This brings us to Claude Steele's self-affirmation theory, which was developed back in 1988. It demonstrates that when our sense of competence is threatened, focusing on deeply held personal values restores our overall self-integrity without triggering that defensive backlash. See, the brain naturally wants to view itself as good and capable, so if you bomb a presentation at work, instead of giving yourself a fake compliment about your public speaking skills, you reflect on a core value, like your dedication to your team or your strong work ethic. That actually buffers the stress in a real, believable way. If you look at the breakdown here, the contrast is like night and day. Unscientific New Age manifestation relies heavily on esoteric fantasy. It forces generic assertions onto a highly skeptical mind, which, as we've seen, carries a huge risk of backlash. On the flip side, clinical self-affirmation is grounded in empirical reality. It broadens your focus to your actual lived values, keeping that risk of triggering cognitive dissonance extremely low. And this is where it gets super cool. We can literally witness this working in real time, using functional MRI scans. Research by scientists like Dr. Emily Falk shows that these values-based reflections physically light up our reward centers, specifically the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum. Doing this releases a cascade of dopamine and lowers your systemic cortisol by actively quieting down the amygdala, which is your brain's threat defense alarm system. What this means is that every single time you practice a value-based affirmation, you're leveraging neuroplasticity to literally rewire a healthier, more resilient path through your brain. This process is called long-term potentiation. Think of it like walking through a dense forest. The first time is tough, but walking that same path over and over eventually creates a clear trail. Repeating authentic statements does exactly that. It moves your brain's default setting away from chronic self-criticism and builds a highway toward emotional resilience. Moving right along to section 3, defeating imposter syndrome. Let's take this university-level neuroscience and apply it directly to the workplace, specifically looking at a phenomenon that hits up to 82% of us at some point in our careers. So instead of faking it with those high dissonant statements that your brain immediately flags as a lie, like "I know everything, I'm absolutely perfect at this," try using what's called the yes, but technique. You simply acknowledge your gaps, but you immediately highlight your proven capacity for growth. For example, yes, I lack experience in this exact role, but I learn extremely quickly. Your brain actually accepts this because, well, it's factually true. And to really lock that in, we use the proof method. Think of it like acting as the opposing counsel in a courtroom against your own self-doubt. You actively compile concrete evidence of your skills, you document your daily objective wins, you record positive feedback from colleagues. Basically, you build an undeniable empirical record of your competence. When you present that data, your highly analytical mind simply cannot dismiss it as just luck or good timing. Okay, section 4, the power of body neutrality. Now let's explore how these exact same neurological principles can completely transform our physical wellness and micro-mental health when it comes to body image. Now, you've probably heard a lot about body positivity over the years, but there is a profound difference between that and body neutrality. Toxic positivity forces you to constantly praise your physical appearance, which can severely trigger that widening gap phenomenon if you don't actually believe what you're saying. Body neutrality, however, offers this incredible, calming middle ground. It takes your brain's focus entirely off of aesthetics and redirects it toward physical function and just simple existence. Imagine anchoring your thoughts with a deeply functional statement like, "My body allows me to experience the world." It's so simple, but it acts like a circuit breaker. It interrupts those harmful appearance-based rumination loops. It pulls you right out of the aesthetic comparison trap and helps you slowly rebuild genuine trust with your body's natural signals. The clinical data backing this up is absolutely rock solid. Over time, routinely repeating these neutral, totally believable statements carves out new mental pathways. We see this supporting recovery from eating disorders, rebuilding lost internal trust, and drastically lowering the emotional charge surrounding body image. You're effectively replacing harsh self-criticism with a stable, highly compassionate cognitive baseline. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Rewiring Your Brain Daily. Let's tie the whole shebang together into an actionable, real-world framework that you can start using today. Just consider this number for a second. 6,000. That is roughly the number of thoughts the average person has every single day. And evolutionarily speaking, our brains are heavily biased toward threat detection, just to keep us alive. If you leave your brain on autopilot, your reticular activating system will just default to scanning for threats. And yes, that includes internal self-criticism. That is exactly why we have to purposefully train our mental filters. So, here is a 4-week action plan that leverages your brain's natural neuroplasticity. In week 1, you start simple, using neutral bridge statements to dampen your amygdala's acute threat detection. Then, moving into week 2, you establish daily self-compassion to build a solid foundation of self-trust. By week 3, you introduce growth-focused values to kickstart dopamine-driven motivation. And finally, in week 4, you deploy highly tailored, evidence-based reframes to really lock in and solidify those new neuroplastic pathways. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Knowing the profound, hard science behind your own neurobiology, how are you going to choose to speak to yourself tomorrow? Remember, your brain is quite literally always listening, and its physical structure is changing based on what it hears. So make sure the narrative you feed it is rooted in your truest values and your undeniable competence. Keep building your evidence, and I'll see you in the next explainer.